Welcome to What is Good, a podcast from the Texas Baptist Christian Life Commission, where we explore contemporary cultural issues through a biblical lens. Micah 6:8 says that God has told us what is good, that we're to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with Him. So whether you're seeking a better understanding of how to live that out, or you're just curious to understand a Christian perspective of what's happening in our culture, we hope that you'll find today's conversation helpful as we discuss what is good.
Hello and welcome to another episode of What is Good, the podcast of the Christian Life Commission. I'm one of your hosts, David Sanchez. With me today, it's Dr. Katie Frugier, our director and leader.
Sorry, I jumped in early again. Hope this isn't an early indicator
of how this episode is going to go.
Oh, no.
We are currently recording on a very dreary day. We delayed our recording because the storms were passing by, and I don't know that it's going to help that much. And also Dr. Irene Gallegos, our director of Hunger and Care. How are you, Irene?
Hello, I'm good. I almost got a second cup of coffee since we delayed, but still enjoying this first one.
What type of coffee is it?
I don't know. It's from a HEB K-Cup.
Good small talk. Good small talk. Way to start our podcast.
In my hunger offering mug.
Yeah, sporting that hunger offering mug. And what a coincidence that you're drinking from that mug today, because today we are talking about the hunger offering. Irene, is this a special year for the hunger offering, besides the fact that it is the 5th anniversary of Bits for Bites coming this August?
We are celebrating lots of things, but more importantly, not more importantly than Bits for Bites, the long-standing history of the hunger offering. This is our 30th anniversary.
30 years.
30 years. It started back
crazy.
in 1505?
1995.
1995.
Okay, so can we just do a quick game? What were we all doing in 1995?
I was making it into all-state choir as a senior.
All right, good.
I was
exciting.
in kindergarten.
Oh my gosh.
So Irene was learning to read.
I don't like this game.
See, 95 doesn't stand out, particularly as a landmark year. I was 10 years old. 1994, I remember vividly because there was a huge flood that impacted my neighborhood. And so I always remember 94 as the year of the flood. And so I was probably in some type of a PTSD in 95.
95 was Mayfest hailstorm. Do you remember that?
Oh, I've heard of it. I was in Houston at the time.
Okay,
but yeah.
I think I just saw
windshields destroyed, 40 people injured at Mayfest. I saw a post about it was the 30th anniversary of that as well.
Yes, I saw that.
That's less encouraging. More exciting is the hunger offering itself. Thank you, Katie, for sending us down that important path.
Anytime.
And so, yeah, we are celebrating the 30th anniversary of the hunger offering. And we thought it would be a nice time to just have a podcast where we just talk about the hunger offering, its origins. We have our current director of Hunger and Care who oversees the hunger offering, and our former director of Hunger and Care, Katie Frugier, who oversaw the hunger offering during COVID, during lockdown. So we want to hear about your experiences, but I thought it would be kind of good to start with Phil Strickland, who was the director of the CLC for quite some time, and his experiences, which led to the start of what was then the World Hunger Offering and is now the Texas Baptist Hunger Offering. Before we talk about his experiences, I'm going to read a couple excerpts from his book, Do Justice, Love Mercy, A Layperson's View of Christian Ethics, which is really, it's a collection of his writings and his messages that he gave at different events. But before we get into that, what was key for him was going overseas and witnessing hunger and poverty in the world in a way which we really don't experience in the U.S. And that was sort of like the catalyst, the beginning of it for him. And so I just wanted to ask the two of you, have you had any experiences where you've gone overseas and you've seen hunger or poverty at a level that's completely, off the scale compared to what we have here in the U.S.?
Yeah, and I actually keep a memento of this trip in my office. I can put a picture of it in the show notes or something. But in college, or right after graduating from college, I went on a mission trip to Costa Rica. And the sole purpose of the work that we were there to do was just to help the pastor build relationships and get invitations for dinner. Like, they told us that was our job, was to get the pastor invited to go have dinner with different church family groups. But in the process of that, we got to meet some of the church members who are already plugged in this kind of mountain community of Costa Rica. So it was fairly isolated. It was about a couple of hours drive out from like the main cities, and so already very different world than anything I had ever seen before growing up in the Houston area. And so that was already impactful, just to kind of see a different perspective, different world, literally. And we met one of the deacons who was at the church, and he had us over to his house, which really is probably smaller than the room I'm standing in right now. And I remember being really moved by how little he had, but what really impacted me was also seeing, even though he had so little, tiny, I mean, he literally had sheets dividing the bedrooms so that they could at least have a little privacy in their home. But he had Christians in his home, and he was overwhelmed and just beaming from ear to ear just at the idea of having the opportunity to host these Christians who came in just to minister to his community, and that he was the host. And he gave us this kind of a rice mixture with raisins in it. It was an interesting, not my thing, but it was okay. But just the pride that he had to do that, and just positioning that against how much pressure there is in America. Like, when we host, like, our house has to look perfect and we've got to have all the nice things and stuff like that, and how that wasn't anywhere on his radar. And you could just see the pride just beaming through his eyes and his smile, that even though he had nothing, what he had was Christian faith and fellowship, and that was what really mattered to him. And he shared his testimony of how the Lord had rescued him from this very dark lifestyle of violence, and now sitting here with Christians in his home, and just seeing that arc of redemption. And we celebrated that with our little cups of rice, and just realizing this is what really matters. And at the end of it, kind of as a side note to make money for his family, he would decorate these little gourds that you could buy on the roadside, and he wanted to gift all of us a gourd, and really didn't want to, because I was like, no, this is your way. Like, let us buy them from you. Like, this is your way. And he absolutely insisted. He would not let us pay him for it. So I just took the basic ones just so he would be able to sell the ones that he had already painted. And I have that gourd still in my office today. So if you go to my office later, you can swing by and see the gourd from Ilario, and just the constant reminder that he is in my life of just what really matters.
I've seen that, and I don't know that I knew the backstory behind it.
Yeah.
Very cool.
That's really cool.
And shortly after my time of graduating at TBHO, I was working for a medical and dental fellowship and coordinating mission trips. And so one of them I got to go on was to Honduras. And we went to a small village. So from Tegucigalpa, the capital, it was like a 2-hour truck drive to a river, and then a 4-hour canoe ride down the river, in a 2 days hike, American 2 days hike.
Wow.
And so
okay, you win.
It was intense. My mom was so nervous that she went on the trip but stayed in the city, because it was like, I mean, this is 2013. But we still had this clunky, it looked like an old cell phone, but it was
like a satellite phone,
yeah,
right?
the satellite phone that was able to call in. And so anyways, it was the most remote I've absolutely been in. There was one point, I mean, it was raining. I'm significantly shorter than the people on the trip. And even at one point, the mud was just so thick. I thought, man, this is a lot. Anyways, all that to say, similar story of the food. They killed a chicken for us. And so we had the beans with a little piece of chicken. It was the smallest piece of chicken, because they made one chicken, they rationed it out for so many people, but it was a delight for them to do that for us. And I remember the feather was still on there. And
did you peel it out?
I did. But it was just a different level of poverty. Absolutely. Like we're saying here. And that doesn't diminish the poverty we have here in the U.S. and in Texas.
Yeah.
Poverty across the world, it really does look different.
What about you, David?
Yeah, a couple experiences come to mind. First, my mom was from Guatemala, and some of her family still lived there. So oftentimes as a kid, we would go to Guatemala. Christmas was the best because of the fireworks. You know, it would just blanket the sky with the smoke created from an entire Guatemala city
Yes.
worth of fireworks.
Christmas.
Like, you can't
So
it's
loud.
so loud. And
I did not know
it's so
that.
smoggy.
That's so cool.
But as a kid, it was wild and fun to just, no regulations there as far as I knew.
Or
if they
for
were,
some,
they were.
it was scary.
Yes. Okay. Fair enough. But I remember, in the U.S., it's not uncommon to see an adult standing on a street corner holding a sign. What shocked me was kids begging. To see kids my age barely having any food and actively doing things to try and get food as opposed to just holding signs. No shade on the person holding signs, but this was just, the different culture and the way that you beg. So, your car would be stopped at a red light and kids would run up and wash your windshield and then ask for money.
Yes.
You'd stop and park in a parking lot, and kids would run up and say, "We'll watch your car for you to make sure no one vandalizes it while you're gone," with the expectation that when you come back, they'll get a tip. It's not an official job. It's just them trying to do whatever they can.
Yeah.
And then I'd say I saw it to even a greater degree than Guatemala during my summer mission trips in China. The way kids were exploited by their parents to make money for their family begging. So one way that they would do this would be to literally latch onto someone's leg and not let go until they were given money. And so there are different styles of begging, and that was one of them. A second one was they would have a certain number of roses, and these are just cheap paper roses that they would have to sell, and they wouldn't be allowed back until their house until they were all sold.
And about how old were these kids, you think?
I don't know. The ones that could latch on could be around 5 or 6 years old, and you'd see little kids with disabilities, like missing an arm or a leg, just literally just sitting on the side of the street with a bowl, asking for money. I could go into all the other types. I think one that fascinated me the most, this was older kids and adults. They would write their life story on the sidewalk in sidewalk chalk. So you could sit and read about what had happened to them and then decide if it was worth, giving them money or not.
Wow.
But just, the effort they were going through showed the desperation. Yeah. But then also culturally, it just opened my eyes to how much harder they had to work to earn something. Usually you will get somebody's going to be altruistic on the side of the road, in the United States. You see a sign being held up, if you don't have anything, you'll see someone else quite often, giving $1 or $5 or a bottle of water or something. And by all accounts, the person can make a decent amount. Here, these people are just scraping for pennies.
As you're saying that, it makes me think of a trip to Brazil, and what's common in some of the trips I've gone on is coming alongside local missionaries who have feeding centers. And, this is, to me, that's all the more important of the work of what we do in the hunger offering, is because there's an opportunity to provide that meal with dignity, to provide a meal that people still feel human, that still feel loved and cared for and seen, and they don't have to beg for it.
Yeah.
And I think that's what Phil Strickland saw, is just this dire need. And there are people who are addressing this great need.
Yeah. And we have our things that we are called to, and the work we're called to with the CLC right now. It's great that we get to raise money and help people who are doing that work, because we don't really have that many opportunities to be there in person. But it's nice to know that we're helping those who are the most experienced and have the most know-how with how to actually genuinely help. So a good segue, though, as you mentioned Phil Strickland again. It was back in 1976 that he and his wife, Caroline, went to Washington, D.C., first of all, and New York City, just to do research on world hunger. And he describes how, as he was reading all of these numbers it kind of helped to start open his heart to it, but it really wasn't until he saw poverty and hunger face to face that it really gripped him. And in the book, Do Justice, Love Mercy, a layperson's views on Christian ethics, starting on page 70, he starts talking about 3 different places that he visited. I might butcher the name of this first one. Ouagadougou is what I'm going to say it is. It's a country in West Africa. And I just want to read a couple excerpts from it. First, he says, as this was the first place that he visited, after being in DC and in New York doing his research. And he says, the contrasts were immediate and vivid. Skinny people instead of plump people, dirty people, few bathing facilities and little water, instead of clean people, huts instead of homes, walking instead of riding, sick people instead of healthy people, fires instead of electricity, weak people instead of strong people, agriculture instead of industry, poverty instead of wealth, rags instead of suits, hungry people instead of satiated people. And what a way with words he had, but just describing the contrast between the two. And then getting more specific, he goes on to say, hunger was becoming a reality. Carolyn and I talked little in the evenings when we came in. It was enough just to handle feeling frustration. Perhaps was the dominant feeling, the frustration of having passed hundreds of people in need and not having stopped to do something for them, the frustration of not knowing what we could do.
I so deeply connect with that. As we'll go into later, just the feeling of helplessness. Like, this is such a big problem. Can we even do anything about this?
Yeah, agreed. Then we move on to Ethiopia. And here's a little excerpt from his visit there. He said, a few stops later, we were in the fourth wall, the international basket cases. These countries are in a tremendous bind. And this is talking more just like the economics of the country. But I thought with just what's happening in our world today, this was very interesting for me to read about. The capital flow is nearly all outward. The 2-to-1 ratio of wealth between the developed and underdeveloped countries in 1900 has become a ratio of 20-to-1 in 1975 and continues to grow. I wonder what it would be now.
It's a wide gap.
It's probably more than that. Yeah, the poor countries getting rapidly poorer. The ordinary citizens, of course, are not aware of this. The leaders are aware, however, and deeply frustrated about how to turn this fact around. We have no economic leverage, one official told me. If you Americans double the price of food, we have to pay it. The price of U.S. food has skyrocketed in the last few years. Without it, our people starve. And we probably have to borrow the money from your banks to buy the food and pay you interest on the money. Then you ask us why we don't help ourselves.
Wow.
There's a lot there.
Looks like you're biting your tongue, Katie.
Well, I think it kind of highlights there is a systemic nature to hunger. That is in the U.S. as well, to be fair, that there are several different, points that I think, when we talk about addressing hunger, you really have to address it from so many different areas because there's so many contributing factors that lead to why a community or a country or a neighborhood might have a higher rate of food insecurity or actual hunger. And as the feeding ministries, you have to stop the hemorrhaging. If somebody comes to you hemorrhaging, you shouldn't be like, let's do a CT scan and figure out what's wrong with you. Like, you stop the bleeding first. But you do need to kind of go upstream as well and eventually be able to figure out, are there systemic reasons for what's happening here? And I think that's what Phil is seeing. And that, really shows how hunger in so many ways exploits just the human dignity of the person, right? That there are multiple times where someone made a conscious decision to exploit somebody else.
Right.
I can't help but think, so I finally feel like finished reading Jeremy Everett's book, I Was Hungry, and exactly what we're saying, it's spot on that, and Katie, you asked earlier, you mentioned, it makes you think, like, can we really end hunger? And I feel like I can just hear Jeremy's rhetoric, like, yes, we can. We can do it together.
I love it.
I have his book in front of me, and it's perfect for what we're saying here. So on page 141 on his book, I Was Hungry. It says, likewise, in our time, we must end the idea that hunger and poverty are acceptable socioeconomic conditions. I fundamentally believe we do not see the poor as our equals, as created in the image of God, just as we are. If we did, how could we justify their going without food, clothing, and shelter? If we saw the poor as human, how could we justify the treatment of the immigrant mother separated from her child at the border? How could we justify wage rates that don't allow someone to buy their own food or medication or to provide for their families, just as we hope to provide for our families? We must admit to ourselves that we do not see the homeless man on the corner as being created in the image of the same God who created us. If we think the poor are created in God's image, then how can we justify poverty? How can we justify children going without food? And it just, that part blew me away. And really thinking, when we consider hunger, are we considering this an issue of how we view people? And whether they are made in the image of God or not? Are we viewing it as just this problem that's in front of us, this need for food? Or are we going upstream and not only systemic issues, but perspectives and the way that we view others? This book just really, it blows my mind. And going to the writings of a lot of the people who have gone before us and establishing the hunger offering and carrying the legacy of the hunger offering of what it is today. We have so many people in the history of this legacy missions giving that have really stood forward and said, we have so many issues going on here, and collectively we are doing something together, and we can continue doing something together to address it.
Yeah. So I've got one more excerpt, and this is when Phil Strickland visits Calcutta, India. And there's a lot that he shares in this one that's really heartbreaking, but I'm going to focus specifically when he went to Mother Teresa's Home for Children, a home for starving children and starving orphans. And he says here, just before I got there, I encountered something I had not seen before in Calcutta. Young children, 2 to 10 years old, lying by the street, each with an empty tin plate in front of them. Most of them looked far too weak to get up and hunt food. The driver explained, they come here in this area to beg, and for many to starve together. It is the place where the children come to die. I talked to one of the sisters. She was about 30 and was a leader of the group. She told me that there are hundreds who want to get into their homes, but there are no beds for them. For many, it is the only possible place where they can have a bed, food, and medical attention. The people are tended to by sisters who are doctors and nurses, and by some volunteers. Most have tuberculosis when they come. They are bathed, checked, and given medical attention. Most are also suffering from severe malnutrition, and they can stay until they die or until they are able to leave. I asked if any ever get jobs, and the sister laughed as if the thought were ludicrous. She said there are no jobs and no hope for jobs.
It really leaves you speechless. Like,
it really does.
It's just, I mean, even for the ministries that we support through the hunger offering who are providing safe drinking water, it really just puts you in a mindset of how we're not in proximity to that here in the U.S. And how can we remember that there are still nations, there are still people, communities that do not even have safe drinking water. For us, it is unthinkable. It's unimaginable, but that's still the reality today. It's almost similar. If someone were to read scriptures about persecution, well, we may here in the U.S. not consider, certain persecutions of the church, but that is the reality in other parts of our world. And so when it comes to hunger and thirst, that is still a stark reality, and not just for, and I think I've said before, sometimes here in Texas, it is making sure that people have meals on the weekends or a second meal for the day. In other parts that we support through the hunger offering, it's just that one meal a day. It's ensuring that someone can even have the sufficient macronutrients for for one day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it also really highlights, I think in my mind, Irene, the challenge, and we've talked about this offline so many times, of how much do we invest international versus in Texas, because the need is great in both areas, but it's also different, that the needs in, other parts of the world are just fundamentally different, it doesn't mean there aren't also needs in Texas. And so there's a lot of prayerful consideration that people much smarter and have done a lot more research than me have really tried to weigh in on, is just to what extent do we focus in our neighborhoods, to what extent do we focus on our communities, our state, our nation, and then our world, and how do we do that? And one of the challenges too is just the reality of just the economy and how the world works. The US dollar is more impactful in some places than others. And so to what extent do we utilize that for the leveraging to get those jobs, to get the resources that just literally don't exist within certain communities? That's one of the challenges that I'm sure Phil also struggled with when they were trying to envision what is this thing going to look like. But I know from the very beginning, my understanding is that the whole reason of starting this was, as you alluded to, David, this was the World Hunger Offering, that this was something that we were going to address. But I also know that Phil cared a lot about Texas children, too, that he really wanted there to be a both-and component to that. Is that right?
I mean, I would say you'll find plenty of evidence in the whole rest of the book just regarding hunger in Texas, also education for kids in Texas, religious liberty for all of Texans. You definitely have him holding up all three banners of the CLC with the work that he did. The do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly.
It was that holistic transformation for communities. That it's not just one single issue that we're addressing here. We're really looking at it from multiple angles.
Yeah. So, you're right on. We do have, just for people to know, we do have tons of copies of this book, which they used to sell, and all the money would go to the Hunger Offering. But if anyone would like a copy of just a collection of Phil Strickland's writing and stuff, just shoot us an email and let us know, and we can get you a copy of it. And maybe I'll try and make sure we actually have like 2 or 3 with us anytime we have a booth. And if someone comes up and just specifically says, hey, I listened to your podcast, can I have a copy of this book for free? I'll say, no, give us money for the hunger. No, I'm just kidding. I'll say, absolutely, you can have it. Thanks for being our listener.
It's like a secret swag giveaway.
Yes,
Ooh,
it is.
I like
secret
it.
Swags giveaway. We'll just have a few of them with us for our podcast listeners specifically. And it's really worth reading through. There's a lot of challenging material.
It's very good.
A lot of challenging material in there. So, moving on from its origins, how his experience led to the founding of the Hunger Offering back in 1995. Fast forward 20 years, 25 years.
Yeah.
Katie, were you the first one to have the official title of director for Hunger and Care?
It had gone around a couple of different iterations. So it was a specialist and different things. But as the role was growing, they decided to go ahead and boost it up. But actually, when I started, I was the Hunger and Care specialist, and then went on to Hunger and Care director.
So you could direct yourself.
I could. No. So, a lot of it, just even the origin of me coming into the work of the Christian Life Commission, I don't feel like I was necessarily the most... I wasn't the typical hunger and care candidate that they had used in the past. In the past, they utilized great women and men who had more of a practical background and like maybe social work or something like that. And my background, as you all know, is not social work or anything like that. My dissertation, my PhD, is in systematic theology, and I wrote on the human dignity and the image of God. And the idea from Dr. Gus Reyes at the time, who was the director, was an opportunity to bring in a new theological component to the conversation of hunger and care, going back to saying, let's focus on the human person and the why. And they challenged me to really kind of bring in some more theological foundations to the hunger and care work, of saying that there's not just the handing of the bread, but let's have a conversation about the person that we're handing it to, this image bearer. Like Irene, like you so beautifully said, like if we really do believe that these people are beautifully and fully made in the image of God, how does that impact how we handle, humanitarian aid? How does that impact the work that we do? As yes, we have to feed the people, but we're feeding them in Jesus's name. And so what's a strategic way that we're making sure that they know that? I remember one of the things that really stood out to me was just going through Matthew 25 and really realizing, like, Jesus says, if you've done these for the least of these, you've done these for me as well. And really wanting to anchor that into the ministries that we saw working. So I came in early mid 2019, And even in preliminary conversations and learning about the work of the hunger offering and just what the CLC was doing, because it wasn't just the hunger offering, there's the advocacy piece in Austin as well. And then also at the time, the person who was kind of director for the hunger offering was also our director of ethics and justice and the associate director. He oversaw some of those things.
And I play video games.
You do great too. But
shout out to Farrell Foster.
Shout out to Farrell. We hope you're a listener of the podcast, Farrell. He's a former associate director for the CLC and the hunger offering coordinator, I believe was his title at the time. And he also hired me, which I appreciate greatly. But all this to say, I remember driving with my husband. At the time, the CLC was based in Austin, and so we were going from my final interview in the Austin offices back home and feeling somewhat conflicted because, truth be told, I didn't really want to move to Austin, but just feeling so drawn and telling my husband, like, these are my people. Like, this is the type of Christianity I want to live out. Like, this is exactly how I envision faith and, our practice actually meeting the road and actually being able to do this, and being so humbled at the idea that, wow, there's some people who do this for a living. Like, this is what we actually get to do. And it really was humbling, and it was an exciting time. It was a real opportunity to pivot, not even pivot, but bring a new, different, skill set to the role of wanting to give the theological foundation of saying, as an image bearer, how do we view the poor? As an image bearer, how do we feed the hungry? How do we view the hungry? How do we view the people who are in need, the marginalized, those who are cut out? And so that was really when I stepped in what the assignment was. And honestly, I don't think, and Irene, you're probably the only other person that appreciates this. It takes a while to really grasp all the hunger offering does.
Yes. Yes.
I remember reaching out to my predecessor, another shout out, hi, Allie Corona, and just saying, and she encouraged me saying, hey, look, it takes a year just to figure out what this thing is. Like, this is a lot. And just feeling like I was drinking from a fire hydrant because there were so many different ministries literally all over Texas, so many churches that wanted to participate and loved the hunger offering. And so they were all in and they were wanting to do all these things. And then there's all these international partners, and just being really amazed and also kind of overwhelmed at the breadth and depth that had grown, in just the 25 years since the hunger offering had first been conceived by Phil. To see where it was at in that moment was really amazing, to be able to kind of step in as the new kid on the block and appreciate everything that was going on. But then, I don't know if you guys remember, but this little thing happened called COVID-19. Have y'all heard of that one?
Rings a bell.
So real quick, we were, here's my COVID-19 story. We were actually in Austin house hunting for my job with the Christian Life Commission during the March spring break of 2020. What were you guys doing in March of 2020? Do either of you remember?
I was getting all state choir. No, just kidding. I'm actually only in my 20s. Wow. I think I was trying to figure out how to be the primary teacher for my daughter. I'd just gotten my doctorate degree. I was without a job. My wife was working full time. So I tell people she was my sugar mama during that time. And yeah, we went into lockdown, and I became the primary teacher for my daughter, helping her through the rest of that spring semester of 2020.
Wow.
I was adjunct teaching and transferring all of our courses. I was teaching undergraduate public health and transferring those courses online and preparing to welcome our firstborn to the family.
Gosh.
So lots of transition.
And pivoting for a family business as well.
I'm actually, now that you say that, now I'm having like PTSD flashbacks of hearing the word pivot a lot in 2020. Did you guys hear that?
Yes.
Adapt, pivot, be flexible. Yeah.
And I'm a millennial, obviously, and so I just have all these visions of Ross from Friends. Screaming, "Pivot! Pivot!" That just is seared in my memory. But really, I mean, all of us, I think, lived that. So, Irene, you were about to welcome a child. So, like, you're trying to figure out, what does this look like? David, you had a school-age child. And so your lives had been pretty drastically uprooted as well. Because I imagine school went online or...
Yes.
Yep. And then same for us. So my kids, we called that the spring break that never ended. We said goodbye to everyone on Friday, fully anticipating to be back, the following Monday, and didn't go back into the school building for a year and a half. I didn't physically. I think my kids did a little bit sooner than that. It was a real disruptive time. And we all, I know to varying degrees, felt that. But from the hunger and care perspective, things started falling really fast, and it really highlighted for me what we were talking about when we say food insecurity, because
Right.
Hunger Offering is kind of dealing in two different arenas. It definitely is dealing with the hungry, and those are the people who physically don't have food, right? That they need the food to eat. But then it also is working with the people who maybe, as Irene said, maybe you had breakfast, but you don't know where lunch is coming from. And particularly what we saw with the March of this, 2020, the spring break that the spring break that never ended, was thousands and thousands and thousands of Texans children who were getting their school breakfast and their school lunch, and maybe even taking home a meal from school, didn't have it. That within just that immediate flip of the switch, there were just an incredible amount of kids, and they didn't know where their food was coming from. Mm-hmm. And it was a really scary time of just looking around. And then added on top of that, you had several groups of people who were disproportionately affected, whose kids were using those school lunches because, my job, I was able to pivot and work remotely from home. And that was an incredibly privileged position that I never want to take for granted. But remember, a lot of our restaurants closed, a lot of our frontline, things that we consider, more hourly based or something like that, they immediately lost their jobs and had no access to income. And then suddenly we're in a situation like Phil Strickland saw in India, where there are no jobs. Nobody could do anything. There wasn't work to be done. And so it created this very scary situation, particularly in Texas, where suddenly it was looking a lot less like Texas than it was India. And so that was the first piece to it, of just watching that fall into pieces, and just watching hunger advocates and people really concerned that this is a real problem right now, that this is something that we need to be very proactive in. Now, to be fair to the schools and things like that, there were several that did pivot and were doing meal distributions. Like if the school was closed, you could still go get a lunch from your school, but you still had to have someone who could drive you to go pick up the meal or something like that. So it wasn't a perfect solution, but it was something that they were willing to do. But what I started also seeing, because of my perspective and the role that I was able to have with the Hunger Offering, is we just started blitzing out to the Hunger Offering ministries, which at the time, ballpark, maybe about 150 ministries total for 2020. And we just started saying, tell us what's going on. Like, you're the boots on the ground. And what I saw was kind of the brilliance of what the Hunger Offering does, which is it wasn't one isolated ministry that just you cut the funding off and the whole thing broke. Because there's so many boots on the ground grassroots ministries literally all over, they were situated to perfectly be able to adjust within their community and rise and meet the moment. Story after story after story of Texas Baptist Hunger Offering ministries that immediately sprung into action, who weren't expecting it, but suddenly found themselves like the frontline workers, like on the front line of a global pandemic. And these are sweet, sometimes, elderly volunteers who just want to love on their community. And now they're the front line of this huge thing. Mm-hmm. So it was an interesting time to be able to sit there and hear their stories. What's the earliest you guys think you would have you ever gotten up for an early breakfast for some reason? Like a meal, like you've got to catch a flight or anything like that?
Oh, to catch a flight? Yeah, sure.
Maybe
4 a.m., 5 a.m.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would probably skip, but
Skip breakfast.
truth be told, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. The only thing I can think of is like, y'all know my family loves Disney. So like, I think we've gotten up really early for some Disney breakfast reservations at a time. One church in the San Antonio area told us that they had cars lining up at 2 a.m. to get a box of food. That was how stretched the resources were, that they were willing to go ahead and start lining up in the wee hours of the night just to be able to have access. But I was honestly so encouraged at the same time to realize that the reason that those churches were able to do that is because the hunger offering was there, and that those churches were already planted in their communities, and that the mechanisms were already set in place to be able to meet that moment. Mm-hmm. And that goes to, I think, the holistic, thoughtful way that the hunger offering began. What 2020 and 2021 showed us is that it works. That the mechanisms of the hunger offering, the grassroots nature of it, the multidimensional sides to it, it met the moment. Like it was able to do what I think and hope Phil was maybe looking down from heaven, or if we're looking down from heaven, I'm not sure, David, you can correct my theology. But whatever perspective from heaven Phil is at, I would hope and think that he was really excited to see that this idea that I think the Holy Spirit, gave him to be able to meet the needs of the marginalized and the poor and the vulnerable, and see it working in this global pandemic that was really kind of scary. And so that was really an impactful time to be able to go on there. And you can look on our social media now. I would encourage people to, if you want to kind of go back and see some of those stories. We did interviews with different hunger offering ministry partners and just let them tell what they were experiencing, from Lubbock to Dallas to gracious, we had a global partner who was dealing with the pandemic in a different country. So you got to hear from several different people at the time. And our idea was, let's just tell their story of what they're experiencing and how they're meeting the moment. And I'll be honest with you guys, some of the people in those videos died from COVID-19 because they were out in their communities doing the thing. And so It was really an incredible time to really see people literally living out their faith and being willing to risk their lives for it, and not a hyperbolic way. And so going into 2021, it really kind of kept going, and we were really struggling with looking at some of this alarming statistics. Just to throw it out there, the World Food Program estimated that between 2020 and 2021, the number of people experiencing what they called extreme hunger, so that goes to, like David, you said, the situation in India or other places where there's literally no food. The number of people experiencing extreme hunger between 2020 and 2021 rose 82%. Texans felt that heavily. Feeding America projected that almost 6 million Texans experienced food insecurity during that year. And so it really became this pivotal moment for us where we looked at the hunger offering. And in the past, we had different themes or different things that we would call for the hunger offering year. And so at the time when I took in, the theme for the hunger offering was called Bless This Meal. And it was this idea of bringing that, feeding people in the name of Jesus. And so wanting this meal to be blessed and thoroughly bathed in prayer, which was a really great, theme, and I loved it. But looking at the numbers and just the extreme nature of everything, we pivoted and we pivoted and turned the idea, and really as a call to all of Texas Baptists to be all in right now, that this was not a moment to hold back, that this was a moment to be all in on the moment, to be all in empowering the marginalized, to be all in healing the hurting, to be all in because God has cared us to care for the least of these. And so we changed in 2020-21. We put out a challenge, and the theme for the hunger offering was all in, and really being able to see churches rise and meet the moment in different ways was a really impactful thing to be able to be a part of and to see. And I'm honored and thankful that God allowed us to get through that. And by the end of 2021, my role was really kind of taking on a new dimension as the associate director, and then eventually becoming the director for the Christian Life Commission. And then, like, Irene, you were literally right there. Like, you had already, I think, started on contract with us, right?
Yes. I was on contract with women's ministry, I think beginning October of 21.
That's incredible.
And then came on board with the CLC April of 22.
Yeah, I couldn't hire you fast. Like, literally, I remember looking and I was like, this is like takes all of the skills that I could bring to something and then all of my weaknesses embodied in one person.
And it's funny because then I actually felt like the chance was taken on me because I felt like the oddball out because I didn't have the ministerial background. I had the practice background.
No, but you had such a strong, like, I would say you did have a ministerial background, just different type of ministry.
Yes. Not in paid ministry, but yes.
Yeah.
Paid is overrated.
Paid is overrated.
Yeah.
But Irene, you were there, right there, as, on contract with our women's ministry. And it was such an easy handoff to say, let's continue this as we're going into what this next chapter needs to look like, to throw that over to you. And I appreciate the fire hydrant I handed you and learning to drink from it.
Well, it's been an honor. When we had a commissioning service per the recommendation of Dr. Reyes and to commission me into this role. And I remember Dr. Hardage saying the hunger offering is something personal. And I didn't really understand it in the moment, but now just 3 years in the role, it's starting to click. I really think that, if Allie said it took a year, I think you told me 2 years, and
I think a year was overestimating my skills.
I agree. I think it took 2 years. It's just, yes. And going back to, Phil Strickland being satisfied with where the hunger offering is today. If you look at the original proposal for the hunger offering, one of the words that stands out to me is consistent. They wanted the hunger offering to be a consistent resource for ministries in addressing hunger relief. And so while we are still addressing humanitarian aid crises that come up across the world and, including COVID, we also we care about ongoing community development. And so the true nature of the hunger offering did show in COVID during the pandemic, because that was a humanitarian aid crisis. It also shows that it didn't stop after that and that we continue the work. Yes. And so that is the point of what Phil wanted to do, is not, and in the original proposal, it says not just when the media highlights the hunger needs. So of course, during COVID, lots of hunger needs were highlighted. The summer resources, which Jeremy Everett has an amazing story that he was in DC and was called upon by the USDA to come into an office immediately. He had just gotten out of a meeting, and he said, when you get that phone call, you go immediately. And he was told, we have a pandemic coming, and a pilot program that he began to get food to students to their front porch, because like you said, some of them did not have transportation. So they did a pilot program, and I think it was like 5,000, or I'm going to butcher the numbers here, but his account is, he was told, can you scale this to 20,000? And then he got a call back, and he said, you know what, let me go back to the team. I can think about it. And again, I'm butchering the numbers here, but the point of the story is then he goes back to the hotel, calls the team. They said, yes, we need to do this. It's not a matter of can we have to rise up to this occasion and do this. And then he gets a call and says, you know what, scratch that. I think it's going to be 50,000. And then he gets another either communication, email or call, says, you know what, 100,000. And it ended up being 200,000. I mean, they even used dog sleds in Alaska to get children the food that they needed during the summer. And so it's just amazing. But that's the whole point of the collective impact, that we are doing this together. And so today, the hunger offering is what it is because of this legacy that has been built to be that consistent resource, that not just when a humanitarian aid, crisis pops up, but this is an ongoing issue. And the beauty is, I do believe that we can end it. Here in Texas, we can end it. And here in the US, we can end it. That's what, the first time I heard Jeremy say that, I thought, I don't know that I really believe that. But the more that I have been around the anti-hunger advocates, the more that I've been around these people who have been working on not only hunger from the immediate boots on the ground, providing the resources, but looking at food supply, looking at policies, it becomes more realistic and believable that we can end hunger here in Texas, here in the US. And I'm not sure what that looks like globally. What's beautiful is that we have this response if we work together, if we have a systemic response to addressing hunger. And the resources are there. And so I am beyond grateful for the many individuals, the churches who have contributed to the hunger offering, because it is a unique opportunity to truly end hunger. And, you know, I've said before, like, I feel like I've drank the juice. I believe in it. When Dr. Hardage told me that it was something personal, when I look around my home now, not only just a mug that I drink from that has the hunger offering logo, or the mouse pad that I have right now that has the hunger offering logo, but I have the bank that sits in the center of my island. And my children now know, and really Rafa, my almost 2-year-old, is grasping what it means. Like when we pray, he's starting to repeat words, and he knows that we pray not only for the hungry, but help us, Lord, help us help those who are hungry. Move in our hearts to do something about it. And so my, almost 5-year-old even knows why we have that bank on our island. When I look outside now, I have a garden, which is insane because I have killed a cactus before. Succulents. How do you kill succulents? But Irene Gallegos was capable of it. And yet earlier, beginning of April, I went to the Baylor Collaborative, the Together at the Table Summit, where a lot of anti-hunger advocates got together to talk about how do we address this. And I was encouraged. One, yes, I contribute to the hunger offering, but what else can I do even in my community? And it has been so neat. This garden is not only, and I'm amazed that I actually have some things growing. That is, purely the grace of God right there. But what's so neat is that beyond having this garden that's going to provide produce for my home, thinking, okay, can I provide for a few neighbors? I've even had my neighbor who lives, I can't even see her house because she has a couple 14 acres, I think. But she grew up on the property that I'm at. And so we sat on the front porch and just chatted. And she said, my mom grew the garden. Because I texted her, I said, I'm over here Googling gardening 101 when I have you next door. Would you come over and chat? And so we have had such beautiful conversations, literally sitting. I invited her. She said, yeah, let's sit on the front porch. And I thought on the rocking chair or the swing. No, we literally sat on the concrete at the edge of the front porch. But it was so neat because she said, yeah, mom had her garden over here. And I planted this tree right here. And she, a week later, she said, hey, Irene, do you need tomato cages? And I thought, I don't even know what tomato cages are, but I guess so. And so she brought over tomato cages and so it's also developing that community. I've gotten to bond and connect with my neighbor. Yeah. And that is, to me, when I think of when Dr. Hardage said this becomes personal, I have literally seen the hunger offering transform the perspectives of my home and the way that we carry conversations for the sake of the gospel. And it's been so beautiful because we do have such a unique role. And now when I think about, Matthew 25, when it's this is Jesus giving, when the account when we enter the kingdom. And I really do think now when I see people, when, going back to the excerpt that I read, when I see that homeless person, when I see an individual who is likely in a situation of poverty, I am much more challenged to consider my response. And the average has stayed around 150 ministries that we support through the hunger offering. This year in 2025, there are 146, if I'm not mistaken, ministries in Texas and around the globe. And it's beautiful to continue to witness the stories that come out of this ministry, where you have one of the ones that really stayed with me is the Luna family, who was in the Valley, South Texas, who went to get food. And it was a grandparents with their pregnant teenage granddaughter in the truck. And they came and got their food. And then they came back another week and got their food. And by the time that the church there in the Valley developed this relationship with the Luna family, 14 family members and neighbors came to know Christ and are in discipleship now. You have another ministry oh, I'm losing the town name, but it's one of our FBCs. It's one of our First Baptist churches.
We've got a few of those.
Yes. And they had a family who came through the food pantry, and now the man is serving as a deacon in their church, and the wife is the kitchen director and manages the kitchen at the church. And so,
which is a huge blessing.
Yes.
Any church has that. They know.
Yes. And so it's just, I think of the bread ministry in Romania through FBC Garland that connects with a ministry with a feeding center in Romania. And they provide, in harsh winter months, they provide the flour for bread, and they have the bread ovens. Who would think a bread oven would be a means to build community? But they have these bread ovens in their church. And so the community comes to use the bread ovens, and there they just develop these relationships. They have these conversations with people. And there was a father who started realizing, you know what, these people, this church has been a blessing to my family. And he didn't say the blessing, but this church has helped me become a better parent, is what was said. It was what the story of the report shared. And so then he said, if this place is helping my wife and I become better parents, we want to keep coming here. And so now they're attending church there. And so you just have so many accounts. You have, just at the beginning of this year, I went to a conference held by the 61 Isaiah Ministries in Honduras. And what was so beautiful is that Shannon, the lead missionary who started this ministry, said, it's because of the hunger offering that we are here today. The hunger offering was the first. There were the early years of this ministry. The hunger offering was the sole source of funding for this ministry. And they are blessed to now have multiple donors giving to 261 Isaiah Ministries in Honduras. They just purchased even more acreage, and they have this great farm that they are working alongside locals. And he has an agricultural background, but again, it's learning alongside, how do the locals do agriculture there, and how can I come alongside them and do it there? Not just implementing the philosophy of how agriculture is done here, but how can I come alongside and be that blessing? And so, and they now have discipleship classes and job training and so forth. And so I was gonna say, there's some of the men who don't have jobs and he says, you know what, come work at the farm for a bit. And he gives them a temp job, and through that develops a relationship and shares the gospel. You have Agriverse in Sierra Leone that said, you know what, we want to bless not only we don't want to just train the men. We want to train the women. We want to have farming families. And he said, because what may happen is that the man may pass away, and then the wife is left behind without a steady economic resource. And so we want the wife to also know agriculture and know how to farm. And they did peanuts. And so they created peanut paste to then sell and have for their home as well. And so just this beautiful opportunity through the hunger offering, where you have food distribution, whether that's readily, made meals or it's groceries. The stories are endless. And so I just am encouraged that as we celebrate 30 years, we have this great legacy that was built up, and we continue. And I pray that it continues for the years to come, because there are so many ministries that benefit. It's not the hunger offering doesn't sustain ministries. It's not the sole funding source for certain ministries, but it certainly helps to support in great ways. And we're blessed to support nearly 150 ministries every single year. And there are some who say, we need that little bit from the hunger offering. It helps us. We have ministries. There's some that serve 30 a month, and there's some like the safe drinking water that serve 30,000 a month.
Yeah.
And so it really, yes, it is amazing what the ministries what they're doing to address hunger in the short term, the immediate humanitarian aid needs, and also the ongoing community development.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things I always liked, even watching into 2020, 2021, you needed the 30, people served and the 30,000. Like the task was too big for anybody. And so it was really an opportunity to say all hands on deck. And the hunger offering had strategic partnerships with all of them. And that was such a cool thing to get to watch.
Yeah. My two big main takeaways from what the two of you shared is, one, that's why I love giving to the hunger offering, because you're giving to people with impassioned visions for unique ways to meet both the physical and spiritual needs of those who they're called to. and the least of these, the poorest of the poor. And so you're not just giving to a group that's going to, just take a bunch of lunch boxes and throw them to a huge crowd of starving people. Like they're building actual relationships. Yes. And so I love that. And they're not doing it to go viral. So you're not hearing about it. It's just happening. And we hear about it when we get those reports. And 2, Katie, I think you did probably choose a good successor for you. After hearing Irene just go off that like that. That was amazing. So.
Absolutely.
We're a great team. I love our team.
Same.
Well, we could really just talk about it for another hour, but we've kind of run out of time. But I would still like to ask you guys, as we do on every episode of the podcast, what is good? Who would like to go first?
What is good is our Bits for Bites.
We've used that one at least twice now.
But we haven't said it's the 5th anniversary of the Bits for Bites, have we?
Oh, I mean, I said it shamelessly earlier in the podcast, but no.
As part of our What is Good, we have not shared that. And so really, I'm grateful. And it's just, I really do love the way that David puts Bits for Bites together that uses something as hobby. He mentioned earlier, like, I just play video games. Well, no, it's a great thing. And not only is it an event, that he does in the fall, but it's also been a way to encourage others. How can you use your hobby to be able to give to the hunger offering, to be able to not only give, but talk about the hunger? And so really, I'm grateful for you, David. Really love that you get to do that. It's really cool that you get to use those hobbies and talents. I'm glad that Katie approves that. And allows you to play video games on the job.
Just one day a year, or sometimes 2, depending on when he's doing it.
I mean, when I was younger, when I first started it was a full 18-hour stream that went through the night. Now it's 2 8-hour streams during the day each day.
With really cool prizes.
Yeah. Yes. Katie, what about you?
Okay, so my what is good is kind of silly, but I'm going to keep it in the family right now. My what is good is my 11-year-old, her nickname is Lissy, Lissy. She goes through these phases where she's really into something, just really kind of obsessed with it. And right now she is obsessed with walkie-talkies. And y'all, we have, I'm on the table where I'm recording right now, there are 3 walkie-talkies. We've got some industrial grade ones that are waterproof and have a 3-mile radius. And so our family's in just constant communication right now. And she just cackles, full belly laugh anytime someone talks to her on the walkie-talkie. So instead of talking to each other from across the room right now, all of us, when you get home, she makes you put your walkie-talkie on, and we talk to each other on the walkie-talkies. And we even have call signs for each other now.
Oh, wow.
Are you Foxtrot?
No, just to keep it simple, but also a little silly, we just come up with ridiculous versions of our names. And so my full name is Catherine.
I have to hear them all now. I have to hear all of them.
Okay. Well, my full name is Catherine, and I've always hated the name Kathy, and so I'm Kathy on there. My husband's first name is David, and he hates the name Dave, and so we make him go by Dave. My oldest is her name is Eve, but everybody always thinks that's short for something. It's not. She's actually named after Eve in the Bible. And so her call sign is Evelyn. And Lissy, people just think her name is all sorts of other things. So just to be funny, we named her Linda. And then our youngest, her middle name is Marie. And so just to make it more American and classy, we called her Mary. So we got Kathy, Dave, Evelyn, Linda, and Mary.
Love it. Love it.
That's so
How fun.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really cool.
David,
Thanks.
What about you? What is good?
Well, my daughter, she's always loved climbing, and she's never been that much afraid of heights. I believe I shared in the past when we were talking about anxious generation. She wanted to get up on the roof with me.
I remember
that. Well, she's recently, our whole family actually has really gotten into bouldering and climbing at a climbing gym in Arlington. And I really liked it because my daughter is actually really skilled at a lot of things. She's good at math. She's a voracious reader, so she's become good at writing as well. She's good at drawing. She's, good in school. And So she doesn't have to work that hard for most things, even though she still likes doing good work. So I was trying to find something for her that it would teach her, just the value of working hard for something. Because oftentimes I would see her start to do something, and if it wasn't coming easily to her, she'd drop it.
I have a kid like that.
Yes. So with climbing, she's in a gym. She's with other kids, around her age, up to like age 17 at this climbing club. It's not competitive yet, but she's got a coach who gives her instructions. And there was this one specific boulder which she's been trying to work on for almost a month. And it was like the moves are so hard, especially at her age and her size, that it's like she'd divide it up and work on just the first part of the boulder. Then when she get that down, she'd like cheat up to the second part and work on that. And then the third part was just tripping her up, like the final hold. It's tricky and it can throw you off balance. And she finally got it yesterday. Yay! After like almost a month of working on it. And her face just lit up. Oh. And it was such a joy to see. And I'm glad I found a safe way to get her to use her climbing that doesn't involve having to be on the roof.
Not on a rooftop.
But she could fall and break something like at the gym. Like it's not completely safe. So it's still taking the lessons from Anxious Generation, and she's learning to be more confident and learning how to take reasonable risks and to calculate risks and dangers, as she's having fun with other people and climbing. And so that's just been a blast. And I've been holding back from sending you tons of pictures and a few videos so much, but one day that dam may burst open and you'll get all of it.
We'll get all the spam at once. That'll be awesome.
Yes. Well, we want to thank everyone for listening and encourage you to give to the Texas Baptist Hunger Offering. We'll include a way to give in the link. Or if you want to wait to get a craft from me this year, I haven't revealed what the craft is, but it's going to be really cool. And I've been picking up crocheting. So we're not using the sewing machine this time.
You dropped a hint.
Crochet. Yes, I did. I dropped a hint on our social media this past Friday, which I don't know when this comes out, it will have been over a month ago. So anyways, thank you, Katie and Irene, so much for being on today's episode. You guys brought us a lot of expertise into the topic, and we thank you for what you have done and what you are doing to help with this ministry. And we just love that it's a way that we can help Texas Baptists have a much larger reach and a much larger influence than they ever would have thought they could.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
It's an honor.
Yay. Oh, Katie muted because she was coughing. I kind of wish she hadn't. That would have been a real adding some percussion.
I've had this cough for like 3 weeks, guys, and it's progressively getting better, but it has not been a pleasant experience.
Did the storm affect your head pressure or anything at all this time
Not
coming
so
through?
much. I thought
think
it might.
my nose was getting I've been waiting to do that because throughout this recording I've been getting more and more stuffy.
But you can make noise now.
This is good behind the scenes conversation. Yeah. And I've been constantly going like this, because I've been having sciatica problems again.
Oh, no.
So we are the walking wounded. I don't think I'm going to include that.
I can make that on a t-shirt. It doesn't have the same ring. The Walking Wounded. It doesn't have the same ring as, those Baptist guys are killing my bill.